Charisma is a weird thing. It's this unclear, murky, shoddily defined quality that, in essence, gives you power and control over people. We often associate charisma as something pleasant, something nice even, but that's just a thing. Charisma isn't the ability to make others happy, it's the ability to naturally and almost subconsciously entice, convince, and even control people and their emotions regarding certain ideas and concepts. In a way, charisma is the closest we humans have to the discrete and natural method of mind control, and charisma is studied extensively by psychologists all over the world as it is a phenomenon incredibly relevant to management and leadership. And it is very commonly utilized, analyzed, and pondered all throughout humanity, even outside of those disciplines. Between philosophy, theology, the aforementioned psychology, and even business and management, charisma is incredibly interesting and insightful to study. So naturally, it would also come up in various fictional stories, as fiction is often a vessel through which we explore reality through a lens of fantasy. One story that deals with the concept of charisma way more than some people might realize is JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Throughout the series' long run, Hirohiko Araki uses quite a few vessels and characters through which he engages in the study of charisma, most of them being Dio Brando. However, one of his most successful and arguably most interesting approaches to the idea of charisma came to paper during Part 7, in the form of the main villain and president, Funny Valentine. Funny Valentine is, of course, the iconic main villain of JoJo's 7th part, Steel Ball Run. As the President of the United States and a powerful stand user, he is a formidable antagonistic force our boy Johnny has to face within the story. But there is more to him. Valentine is one of the most popular and generally praised characters in all of JoJo, with a decent portion of the fanbase citing him as their favorite villain. It even goes so far that many readers wonder if Valentine is even a villain to begin with, and claim that his goals and behavior were arguably more just and good than even our protagonists. And overall, I myself consider him to be one of the best characters Araki's ever written. So what is it exactly that makes him work? It might be his charisma. Valentine is incredibly charismatic due to a few aspects of his personality. First of all, there is this air of integrity. Between his promises and his sublime demeanor, Valentine gives off this vibe that makes him feel consistent in his words and actions. His constant reassurance that he will always keep his promises and his strict and stoic devotion to his country give him the kind of honest integrity that many people end up flocking to. We as humans often feel attracted and influenced by people who are like rocks among the waves, stable, consistent, and have integrity. This is even further reflected in his stand, D4C. While the ability itself is insanely powerful, it is also restricted by some very clear and stringent rules, which gives his stand and therefore him a sort of controlled air of integrity and consistency, like he has clear rules that he follows and honors, and this is again something that adds to his charisma and to the air of integrity. This is further enhanced by another aspect, his confidence. In basically every scene he's in, Valentine seems 100% convinced that whatever happens, his plans will end up working. He speaks with a certainty and confidence that makes quite the impression, as if once he sets his mind on something, it is guaranteed that he will succeed. He also isn't afraid of taking charge of a situation personally and betting his own life on the success of his plans. This gives us, the readers, the impression that he will completely and utterly believe in himself and know that if he gives it his all, he will come out on top. And as you know from most shonen protagonists, if a character believes in themselves hard enough, we can end up believing in them too. And luckily, he can back all this confidence and belief up with actual competence and ability. It's one thing to talk a big game, but another to actually deliver, and thanks to his monstrously powerful D4C ability and his own incredible intellect and creativity, he can certainly do that. All of these aspects, however, feed into one bigger reason he is liked: his conviction and resolve in his goal. Valentine, out of all the JoJo villains, probably spends the most time musing about his plans and explaining and justifying them at length. The goals he has in mind for himself and his country seem to be born out of a noble integrity and patriotism, and are carried out with such confidence and competence that we quickly begin comparing him to our protagonist Johnny and begin asking questions. Is Valentine actually not a villain? Are his goals justified? Is he the actual hero of this story? No, absolutely not! Let's look past what Valentine wants to present of himself, and let's actually properly understand what he does and who he is. His grand ideals about protecting America all hinge on him spending a ludicrous amount of money on a risky, unresponsible horse race across the continent in the hopes of finding a magical corpse. A corpse which is supposed to do... what? We do end up seeing what Love Train is capable of, but for all the years leading up to the events of Steel Ball Run, Valentine could only theorize what the Saint's corpse would really do. He essentially began pursuing a weapon of mass destruction on a whim without knowing what it would bring or do. His entire master plan was built on basically nothing but assumptions. As we discussed in our last Steel Ball Run video, Valentine's entire persona is based on ideals and beliefs he projected onto the handkerchief of his father, but because he never knew his father properly, those beliefs aren't based on anything but Valentine's own natural tendencies and inherent qualities. But he justifies those by attributing it to an external source, making it seem more like the world taught him that as opposed to, I just think this. Keeping that in mind, him pursuing the corpse while basically knowing nothing about it seems very consistent and in character. Which is surprising, because in everything else, Valentine is quite inconsistent. While he often speaks of patriotism and justice, he sure doesn't actually keep those ideals. He organizes a deadly, incredibly large-scale and stupidly expensive race, endangering not only countless American lives, but the economical security of the United States. And he does on occasion indulge in cruelty that has nothing to do with his goals. For example, that one time he forces himself on his wife, only to discover that it's actually a 14-year-old girl, only to then proceed forcing himself on her for... justice? Patriotism? But probably his biggest failing comes at the end of the part when he actually learns what the corpse really does. It, basically, attracts good fortune and happiness. However, because the universe seemingly pursues a zero-sum equivalence of good and bad, the corpse also pushes misfortune away from it and onto other places and people, essentially forcing random disasters and misfortunes on others while the corpse and its bearer bask in only the good of the world. And while that, together with Valentine's speech, might convince you that it is a viable way of ensuring America's safety, let's think about this for a second. As we see in the final arc, the corpse's repulsion of misfortune is rather extreme and basically distorts reality. Having this go on for a considerable amount of time, or forever as Valentine wants it, most likely would plunge the world into chaos, eventually jeopardizing the US as well. And even if America remained completely unscathed while the world burns around them, it is nonsense to act as if this is a noble goal. Patriotism can be noble, but certainly not when it's at the cost of literally every other country on Earth. Valentine sees all of this happen, but he doesn't actually think about whether or not this will have any consequences that will make him a worse person. Because he doesn't think of himself as a villain. He thinks his goal is completely justified, and so he just pushes through with it. Even though by the time he achieves Love Train, it is very clear that this is a cataclysmic weapon. That this is not something any person of any nobility or even sound mind would want for the world. So, no. Valentine is certainly not a hero and not a good guy. He does some pretty bad shit, and his goals are incredibly selfish and ruthless at best, and just straight up dumb and self-destructive at worst. So why? Why is Valentine did nothing wrong such a common idea? Why is he regarded with such respect and even considered a possible hero? Why do we often hear this, oh, Johnny wasn't the actual protagonist, it was Valentine rhetoric, even though if you look at it neutrally, you will see that most of his goals and ambitions and actions are actually pretty villainous. Why do people like Valentine? Because Valentine is essentially a very well written and even better presented politician. His consistent confidence, his ability and competence, and his bombastic speeches not only make him very notable, but they are also propaganda. Propaganda not directed at any characters within the story, but at us, the readers. The story takes great care to ensure that Valentine is presented in an incredibly favorable and flattering way. His speeches are long, and most big panels that the reader will obviously focus on are centered around the justice of his goals and the meaning behind his actions. By comparison, the sections showing him doing dirty deeds or otherwise filthy acts are minuscule by comparison, almost pushed into the background as not to be seen too much by the reader. Araki gives us all the info about Valentine and his goals, but he chooses to show off the positive aspects in a bombastic, attention-grabbing way, while being very low-key about the negative ones. This then combines with the natural charisma of Valentine to create a pretty unique effect. Valentine's charisma and propaganda have become so effective, so selectively impactful, that their effect leaves the pages the character lives in and permeates into our real world. We become entranced by his charisma, and we become convinced by his propaganda, even if his actions, looked at closely, are very clearly those of a villain. We believe in him both because he believes in himself, and because both he and the way the story presents him manipulate us into buying into his rhetoric. The story embellishes his qualities while sweeping his faults under the rug, and by doing that, it makes him seem like a way more justified character. We become naturally drawn to his ideology and start potentially questioning whether or not he's the villain, not because he's more righteous than our protagonist, but because both his natural charisma and Araki warp our perception of him into that of a justified hero rather than the ruthless powermonger following an idiotic plan that he really is. And it's just such a genius and amazing approach because it makes the character not only live on paper, but within our real world, and brings his charisma in direct contact with us. Compare this to Dio, Araki's other foray into the idea of charisma. With Dio, charisma was simply this magical quality that pulled people towards him and aided him in building an army of loyal henchmen. It was the whole Dio is so sexy he attracts people to work with him. But with Valentine, his charisma isn't affecting random enemy stand users, but is instead slowly manipulating us, the readers, and it's slowly pitting us against the protagonist. And I think it's this that makes Valentine such a fantastic character. Don't get me wrong, none of the stuff I criticized about him earlier is to say that he's a bad character. He is one of the best things Araki's ever written, and a part of the reason for that is that he can be this flawed, this bad basically as a person, but still be liked so much because of how he's written and interwoven in the story. I really think it's these two aspects of Valentine, his charisma and his presentation, that lead to him being liked by so many people, and with so many people associating him with justice, disregarding all the red flags. I think this is why we get so entranced by him and his quest. I think this is why most people, if ordered by him, would indeed take the first napkin. Thank you all for watching. Consider subscribing and or supporting me on Patreon if you want more content like that. Take care and be safe, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.